the KLSU Tailgate Show, the LSU Student Media Football pregame show, live from the KLSU studio.
Welcome into the KLSU Tailgate Show. Today we are in the Student Union. Joining me is Andre Champagne and Nick Lopez. I am Patricia Caputo, and today we will give our breakdown and analysis of the LSU vs. Ole Miss game, which will take place at 2:30 p.m. on Saturday in Tiger Stadium. With that being said, let's jump right into it. Start off talking about this LSU offense. LSU came away with a win against Florida last week, 45-35 in Gator territory. They are now 5-2 on the season. With that being said, Andre, what improvements did we see specifically in this offensive line for LSU last week?
Yeah, in the offensive line, LSU just completely was just aggressive all game. We saw Florida wasn't that big of a challenge, though, for the LSU offensive line. This week it's going to be different. We saw Campbell come back, and the line improved very much. Emory Jones has progressed well as a tackle, and he really held his own. But this week is going to be a little more difficult for the LSU interior guys, just how it has been with Charles Turner, Miles Frazier. They've had their struggles. So I could see some problems with this Ole Miss, defensive front giving, our interior guys some problems.
Yeah, like Andre was saying, Will Campbell coming off the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week. The offensive line did look good last week. I feel like the communication is finally getting there. They're starting to really trust each other. But I think it will be a bigger test this week against an Ole Miss team.
I did like what I saw a lot on the right side. We know we've had problems there with Miles Frazier and Emory Jones, but now it seems that this offensive line is getting more comfortable, as you both have said, giving more time for Jayden Daniels in the pocket. But Jayden Daniels wasn't the only star last week against Florida. You had Josh Williams, who ran for 106 yards, and for Ole Miss, that was something that they struggled with, containing the run game, as Auburn's Tank Bigsby went off. Ole Miss, Auburn went over 300 rushing yards against Ole Miss. With that being said, does Josh Williams need to have another 100-yard game this week to help LSU defeat Ole Miss, Andre?
I definitely think that the LSU run game has to be effective for this game because, like you said, Ole Miss allowed 300-plus rushing yards last week. But I think the key for LSU is just going to be mixing in the run and pass when to do it at the right time. I think whether that's Josh Williams or John Emery, it won't matter too much. But Josh Williams has been that more consistent back for LSU. So Emery's going to have to contribute, though. It can't be just a one running back, game for LSU.
Yeah, I agree with Andre. I don't think a certain Tiger needs to hit 100 yards, but if you can get like 2 or 3 to hit like 75 on the ground, I would say that's just as effective as one reaching 100. So I think that running back committee just really needs to have a good game if they look to beat Ole Miss.
I agree. Both of these, you need to be great in both the running game and in the passing game as well, and that was something that helped them defeat Florida when Josh Williams was finally able to break over 100 yards last week. Another guy like John Emery, he's been in the shadows. This could be a week that he comes out and shows how good he really can be, and not to mention Armani Goodwin will be back this week after he's missed the past few weeks after tearing his hamstring, but it is in question how much we will see of him due to that injury and him coming back. With that being said, is this the week that LSU finds that running back number one, a guy like Josh Williams or a guy like John Emery? Or, as you both said, do you think that we still need to continue this rotation with this running back? Nick, what do you think?
I think at this point of the year, if you're going to find that RB1, you have that this game, especially with you going into your bye week, and then Alabama. But I think they will stay with the running back by committee because I think the fresh legs are really playing a big role in how successful they have been on the ground.
Yeah, I think Williams will be the RB1 going forward because it's kind of late in the season. But if Armani is back to what he was before his injury, he could give him a run for his money. So I think that Josh Williams is just so good, for LSU. He's always doing something right when he's on the field. And when he is on the field, things go right for LSU. I mean, you look at it, you saw Mississippi State, things went right. Florida especially, things went right. So it's kind of a, reoccurring theme. So I think going forward, he needs to be that guy.
We used to preach that John Emery Jr. was the guy that can go out there and block, and 9 times out of 10 a quarterback is going to want a running back that can block. But Josh Williams last week proved that he can do that as well, that he was great blocking, allowing Jayden Daniels to stay more comfortable in the pocket, and again, over 100 rushing yards. The thing about LSU is, can they do it again? That's the question this week. That backfield has been depleted for most of the season. A lot of the times it was Jayden Daniels who's leading the team in rushing. Last week it was a little different. Can they keep that consistency to go against Ole Miss, who is now number 7 in the AP polls? Now, we talked about this offensive line. What about this Ole Miss defense? Talking about them, can this offensive line pair up against this Ole Miss defense?
Yeah, that's the big question. It's going to be a really fun battle to watch, as the Ole Miss defense is going to have clean things up for us. I mean, they looked awful against Auburn. But I'm more interested to see how they handled Daniels, which Tennessee, they did put a quarterback spy on him, which I expect Ole Miss to do as well, because he struggles with a spy. But Jayden will have to know what to do in these moments. You know, you've seen it once. All right, you've learned from it. You threw an interception during that game. You couldn't really run. You're going to have to capitalize off of it. Find some things that work, you know. Scramble, whatever you got to do. Just stay in the pocket. Do whatever works for you.
Yeah, I definitely do think this game will be won in the trenches, whether it's Ole Miss applying pressure to Daniels or the LSU offensive line making him more comfortable. But like Andre was saying, if they put a spy on Daniels and limit his mobility, I think it'll be a rougher game for him if he has to stay in the pocket and is not able to improvise as much.
It all falls back on this offensive line. Whatever they do, the type of game that they have is the type of game that Jayden Daniels can have, this type of game that these running backs can have. And it depends on, can this Ole Miss defense break through this offensive line? Again, this line is young. You have 2 freshmen. Even though, yes, Will Campbell won SEC lineman, he's still learning, he's still growing. And that's what this Ole Miss defensive end has to take advantage of, this defensive line. You have a guy like Jared Ivey, who won SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week in their win against Auburn. But then you also have a guy like Cedric Johnson, who is questionable to play, and he's played great thus far this season before his injury. He had a good game against Georgia Tech and was able to force fumbles and things of that nature. But with that injury, again, another question, how good can this defensive line be? But let's talk about this wide receiver core, right? Kayshon Boutte gave what the fans had wanted this whole entire season. He had 6 receptions for 115 yards against Florida last week. How does this help open up this LSU offense this weekend?
He's your best player, and in the SEC, you can either double team him and pay for it with another LSU player, you know, just going to work on somebody else, or you can put him one-on-one and still pay for it. That's how I think of it. He's a team's nightmare, and there's no other team Kayshon is wanting to play than Ole Miss. He went off against Ole Miss 2 years ago at home. I think it happens again, to be honest. I mean, he's just stepped up huge in the leadership role. He gave a talk to the team, to the offense during halftime, and we never really saw that from Kayshon. And so I think, you know, the culture is really changing here at LSU, just seeing that.
Yeah, I think when Kayshon is playing to his full potential, he's one of the best receivers in the country. It's undoubtedly. But he has to get started early. If he doesn't, it takes him out of the game. I think he gets in his own head sometimes. And if he is able to get started early, I think it'll open up the game for the other receivers or even the running backs, as they'll have to focus more on the secondary.
That was a key to winning the game against Florida, that they were able to quickly open up this offense. A lot of people have said that this LSU team looks like a second-half team this season. They didn't look like that against Florida. Again, the consistency. They have to make sure that they're staying consistent. Get Kayshon the ball immediately. He becomes an immediate threat. And not to forget, you have a guy like Malik Neighbors. You even have a guy like Jeray Jenkins, who has been under the shadows this year. He's waiting for that breakout game. We know the things that he can do to help this offense. And if you're able to balance it out and have Josh Williams and Emery, along with these dominant wide receivers, shout out to a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. as well. We've preached the depth about this LSU offense all season, and it seems that they're finally showing as to why we've been talking about this, as to why they've been such a focal point in this offense in the media all season long. But Jayden Daniels, now we know that he can pass the ball. He showed it last week, but for the majority of the year, he was using his legs a lot. He was very mobile, having to run out of the pocket, having to scramble. What does he do this week, Andre? Is he more of a passer, or is he using his legs again?
I would say primarily more in the pocket. He's got to stay in the pocket, because look what happened last week. He looked like a whole other player. His football IQ just during that game was nearly perfect. So you know what he's capable of. You know what Jayden Daniels can do. He needs to stay in the pocket to be successful against Ole Miss. Granted, he can still use his legs, just not as much. That can't be his first reaction like it was, against Auburn or, other teams. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I still want to see Jayden Daniels continue to, progress through his reads instead of just giving up on the play too early. And I think he did show last week he is a more than capable passer, and I think he will continue to build off of that momentum that he started.
Daniels threw for 349 yards last week and only had 44 rushing yards. I'd like to see that in a quarterback because that was the big question. What Jayden Daniels are we going to get this year, the passer or the guy who uses his legs? And he showed that he can do both against Florida. Once again, I think part of that just comes from making sure that you're starting early and this offensive line being able to help him out. He didn't seem that he was pressured. What I also love to see from Jayden Daniels is that he didn't wait for a guy just to be wide open. He took the risks, and part of that might have came from that he finally threw that interception against Tennessee. He got it out of the way. He doesn't have to be perfect. Take a risk downfield, throw it, see what you can get out of it. Again, you have these big guys, Brian Thomas Jr., Kayshon Boutte. Utilize them. Make sure that you can make the plays, and don't be scared to take a little bit of a risk. Moving on, we spoke a little bit about this Ole Miss defense, but let's jump further into it. What is this defense focusing on? So we're saying that Jayden Daniels should pass the ball more. Is that what this defense is looking out for this week?
I don't think so. I think if you're preparing for just one thing, LSU's going to pick up on it, and they're going to score, pass on the ball. Just like LSU, Ole Miss, Chris Partridge, the defensive coordinator for Ole Miss, he's going to have to call defensively the best game he's called so far because, LSU, they're smart. They're really smart coaches. They're going to pick up on this. And they're going to make you pay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Ole Miss really needs to try and make LSU a one-dimensional team. Like I was saying earlier, when the wide receivers don't get started early, sometimes it tends to be a long game for them. So if you can get to the receivers early and make LSU more of a running team, and then you're able to focus on that for Ole Miss, I think that'll be key for them.
I would like to see Ole Miss force LSU to throw the ball because there's been problems with this wide receiver core all season and Jayden Daniels. The connection, it seems that they finally got it started against Florida, but that was one game. You had just Kayshon Boutte, Jeray Jenkins, drops, just pointless drops. Mason Taylor, another guy throughout the season. Not to say they haven't improved, but that's right now looks like their weak spot. Stuff the run game, contain Jayden Daniels, and with that, it seems that these wide receivers get a little nervous or they don't work so well under pressure. Jayden Daniels sometimes is the only guy that does, and then this offensive line folds. So put that pressure on that offensive line. Make Jayden Daniels throw the ball because there's a possibility that these wide receivers make costly mistakes. But what is this defense preparing for this wide receiver core, right? They're only seeming to get better, at least what we saw last week. So how do you prepare for a wide receiver core if you can't get to the quarterback for when they have so much depth? Nick?
Like I was saying, take him out of the game early, especially with Kayshon, who earlier in the season against Florida State and just some of those other games, when he wasn't there early, he got in his own head, causing him to make those simple mistakes. So if you can take one or two of the receivers out of the game early for Ole Miss, I think it'll make it a lot easier for such a wide receiver-heavy team.
Now, Andre, we talked about Kayshon. He had a good game, but his first touchdown this year was against Tennessee. That was 2 weeks ago. With that being said, Lane Kiffin, this defense, do they zone in on Kayshon, or are they looking more at guys like Malik Neighbors and things of that nature?
Yeah, so the Ole Miss defense runs a 3-2-6 defense, which is huge zone coverage. They drop 6 guys back, meaning there's going to be zone all over them all game. They're going to try and take Boutte away, but I can tell you he's going to find a way. If there's a will, there's a way. I think Kayshon's just going to go off. I just have some odd feeling about this week.
I love that you said that because that was going to be my next question. Do you play zone or are you playing more man? Because there are so many guys that you have to look out for. And, of course, when you play zone, but as you mentioned, Andre, you got to keep a spy on Jayden Daniels. That's something that this LSU defense is going to have to do as well with Jackson Dart. But Jayden Daniels, you know he can scramble. You know he can get out of the pocket. So make sure that you have a guy looking in on him, zoning in on him, possibly maybe just talking about this Ole Miss defensive line, a guy like Troy Brown out of Central Michigan, some linebacker, a safety, someone to look out for Jayden Daniels who can get to him quickly. The biggest issue right now with this Ole Miss defense that I'm seeing is just the injuries. They're all coming back. They're a little injury prone if they are back, and if not, they're out of the game or they're just struggling. Everyone's a little banged up as we are midway through the season.
Which I can go more into depth with it. The 3-2-6 rushes 3 defensive linemen, playing 6 in coverage, 2 linebackers, one might blitz and one might spy. They usually use one to spy the quarterback. That's what they did with Levis. That's probably what they're going to do with Daniels. So every now and then, Ole Miss is really sneaky with their blitzing. They're going to rush two or more with their linebackers into the interior. That's where I could see LSU having some problems because their interior offensive lineman, as we know, is not as strong as the outside guys. But Daniels is going to have to he's going to have to compromise.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. And now let's talk about this Ole Miss offense. It seems to be the main part of this team, right? The reason why this team is so good, it fuels this team. There's two men in the backfield, right? We talk about Jackson Dart, but let's talk about this backfield, right? You have Quinshon Judkins and you have Evans as well, Zach Evans. How much of a threat are they to this LSU defense this week, Nick?
I think they're a big threat. You have to be able to, you got to stop the run game, especially against Ole Miss. You want to make them one-dimensional, kind of like LSU, or like Ole Miss wants to do against LSU. So if you can focus in on them early, take them out of the game, and then drop maybe in coverage a little bit, if you do get ahead on the scoreboard a little bit, make them pass the ball, be key.
I agree. In terms of depth, this is going to be the scariest running backs as a duo that LSU is going to face all season. They're both super fast. They're just so fast. Judkins is super fast when he hits the holes, and then LSU, he's going to make LSU pay with such a depleted safety position. I would say they're in. Evans is really good with making guys miss. So they're both just really good at breaking tackles.
Ole Miss is third in the United States for rushing yards per game and first in rushing touchdowns. Quinshon Judkins is just a freshman, but he's come out. He's been such a great asset for this team. Had 139 yards against Auburn last week. Zach Evans, 136. So that's something that this LSU team is going to have to look out for. You're going to have to find how can you contain that run game. But you're also going to have to say, how can you contain Jackson Dart, Ole Miss quarterback, right? Does this LSU defense focus more on this passing game? Because he's also another guy who ran for 115 yards last week. What do you think, Nick?
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
What does this team do? Jackson Dart, you have Evans, you have Judkins. What are they focusing on and when you're looking at Jackson Dart?
Earlier in this week, Brian Kelly had a press conference. He was talking about how Dart throws what he says is one of the prettiest balls in all of college football. So I know Brian Kelly is looking out for Jackson Dart. He does expect him to have a good game or a big game. He wants to limit that, I think. I think that's the big one thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. With his passing, if he gets on, he's going to be super hard to get off. You know what I'm saying? Like, if he gets hot, it's going to be hard for LSU to get to him after that. So, you have to get to him early. There's really no hard explanation for this. You have to get to Jackson Dart early.
This LSU defense seems to prepare for one thing. And by that, I mean, this whole season it was, okay, you have to prepare for the quarterback in his passing game or the running game. And this week they have to do it all. That this Ole Miss offense averages 242 yards rushing and 242 yards passing and on the season. And with that being said, you have to make sure that you're looking at Jackson Dart, that you're looking at these running backs. You can't just go into this game saying we're going to be one-dimensional, focus on one thing. Brian Kelly in that press conference also called Jackson Dart a dual threat, and that's exactly what he is. He's similar to Jayden Daniels. He can throw the ball downfield. He can use his legs. In that game versus Auburn with Robbie Ashford, this LSU defense seemed to prepare for his legs and forgot that he could throw a pretty nice ball too. So hopefully this week they can fix those mistakes that they made against Auburn despite them coming away with that win, and they can do something similar where right from the jump they're focusing on Jackson Dart, his run game, his legs, his mobility, and his pass game as well. But you have to give credit to this Ole Miss offensive line because they allowed 3 of their players to rush for over 100 yards last week. So they were able to protect Jackson Dart and Evans and Judkins. Is this this line, though, how can they go up against this LSU defensive line? Are they prepared to go up against this Ole Miss offensive line, Andre?
The LSU defensive line just needs to stick to their fundamentals. I don't know why it's been such an issue with them tackling lately, but if they just play sound with fundamentals, togetherness is so big when you're a defensive line and you're a unit and you're just there down to down. You're so tired. You just want to push. Each guy has to be there for each other. I think that's going to be the biggest thing for LSU because the Ole Miss offense, they've seen nothing like it. Lane Kiffin is an offensive mastermind. So they're going to have to, this is going to be the biggest test for them in terms of, conditioning and, getting to the, line of scrimmage down in and down out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger stories that we haven't covered yet is how Ole Miss is starting, or has a couple of redshirt freshmen that have been starting the past couple of weeks. I think experience that they're lacking is not going to help them in a game against LSU, especially like with your experienced pass rushers like B.J. Ojolari, your Ollie Gaze and all that. I think they have that mental edge on them. I think I'll be able to.
Yes, for the past 3 weeks, Ole Miss has started 2 redshirt freshmen at tackle, and then they have experienced guards, though. So that's something that could help out Ole Miss and has helped out Ole Miss for the last 2 weeks. But you could say the same thing about LSU with those 2 freshman tackles and how they've been able to put this team together and help this offense out. But that's also what makes Ole Miss so good, is that this offensive line is young. Some of them are really experienced, some of them are really young on the outside, and they're still able to find a way to make plays. You still have 3 dominant guys who are a huge threat to this defense. But this LSU off defense, we know what they do have is experience. Even though we haven't seen what we have expected from Ali Gay, he has the experience. B.J. Ojolari, and the list can go on and on. But this team has to play, Andre, as you said, together, right? But Ole Miss, they haven't had a very difficult schedule this year. They're number 7 in the AP polls, as we mentioned, but the only team that they've played that was ranked this year was number 19 Kentucky. With that being said, is this LSU defense possibly a culture shock for this Ole Miss offense this week, Andre?
Yeah, if LSU's well prepared for the game, it could very well make the Ole Miss, offense feel them, because, we saw them struggle against Kentucky, and Kentucky lost to South Carolina. So there's just kind of a trend there, where is Ole Miss really battle-tested, because they haven't really played anybody outside of those teams. They played like Toledo, Georgia Southern. Some of those teams are just not good. So, if Ole Miss is coming into this game, thinking it's a cakewalk, they're definitely in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, I think back to experience, the Ole Miss team this year, they don't have much experience against a good team. They haven't faced a D-line like this, really. They haven't faced, honestly, a defense at all like this year. So I think it will be an eye-opener for them, and I do think the LSU defense will play a major factor in this game.
And this LSU defense has to work together. You want to hear a guy like Harold Perkins and Jay Ward get a little bit more involved, but it is a different animal. And with that being said, Lane Kiffin used the transfer portal a lot this year. He recruited some pretty good players, but again, that's where the inexperience comes in. Similar to LSU, but right now, Ole Miss, you have this great team, but who have you played is the big question. You haven't gone against those big, great teams. Now you're going on the road, a hostile environment in Tiger Stadium, and you have a team that's completely new this season. A lot of new faces for this Ole Miss team. We talk a little bit about this LSU defense. Let's go in a little bit more depth, right? We talked about Ole Miss and this extremely balanced offense. So how does the defense prepare for Ole Miss when they have just so many weapons? What are you looking out for this weekend, Andre?
Like I said, you just have to mix it well. It's kind of on the kids to play sound and well, fundamentally, tackle well, like that. But also defensive coordinator, you have to give them, the right opportunities to blitz whenever they need to. Whenever we need a drop back in coverage, it just has to work out perfect together. It's so hard. The science behind it is just crazy. But I think you got to put your best players out there if you're LSU. Perkins not being in Tennessee a lot, you can't see that this week.
Yeah, I think that Tiger defense is going to need to get to Dart early, make him uncomfortable, get in the backfield, disrupt the running backs. And if they do that, I think the crowd will start getting into the game more, which will make the offense harder for Ole Miss. So I think if you can do that early and often, that'll be big.
Again, you got to hear guys' names, right? A guy like Harold Perkins, he was the star for the few weeks, and then all of a sudden he just falls off. And I know there were some injuries with this secondary and things of that nature, but you got to fix it. You got to make tackling. Tackling is so important, and that's something that's going to be crucial for LSU to win this game. Brian Kelly said it in his press conference. He said, I don't want it to sound this easy, but we do have to tackle. It's the fundamentals of football. You have to make sure that you're doing your job and you're getting that done this week, or else it could be a bad game in Tiger Stadium, if we're being honest. But talking about this, who's a guy that you want to hear this week, Nick? A guy in this LSU defense that you want to have a good game that you might be rooting for this week?
One of the things I always like watching in any sport is the development of a young guy. So I always like to hear when Harold Perkins makes a play or watch that. So I want to hear his name this weekend, especially like we were saying, didn't have a big game against Tennessee. Bounced back last week a little bit with his game winning sack or whatever. And I just want to see him do more this week.
For me, it's going to be a shocker to y'all. I think Joe Fouché. Joe Fouché's been incredibly, I'm not going to say good in terms of tackling in the open field. Coverage-wise, he's been getting beat a little bit. So we need to see him in that safety position just get into coverage, stop coverage bust from happening, tackle well. That's really what's going to win you this game is just tackling right, making sure the big plays don't happen.
I like to see a guy like Jay Ward. I've been saying this for a few weeks. Liam was on the show just a few weeks ago and said this, but Jay Ward had 15 tackles against New Mexico. And Liam did say, well, it's New Mexico. That makes a lot of sense, which is true. But then he suffered an injury, and he comes back, and he just had, again, trouble tackling. He was part of those mistakes that happened. Notably, Anthony Richardson, 83-yard rushing touchdown. And Ole Miss seemed like they were playing flag football out there for a little bit. You got to make sure that you're wrapping up the guy. You got to make sure you're getting out to them. And you need someone in this secondary who can come out and who can be a leader. And that's what they need right now. Mekhi Carter's having a good season. You need another guy. Even a name like Colby Richardson, I would like to hear for the right reasons, not so much a pass interference call, but turn around, look at the ball, make the right moves. You are a senior. I know you're a transfer from McNeese State. You're still getting into the swing of things, but we're midway through the season. The excuses are minimal here in the SEC. So to see a guy like him possibly have a good game as they are going up against guys like Jonathan Mingo, who right now has 507 receiving yards on the season, leads Ole Miss, and even a guy like Malik Heath, who has 23 receptions on the season, who's leading Ole Miss in receptions right now as well. Those are dominant guys. Those are guys who have been around. Malik Heath, formerly at Mississippi State, he knows how the SEC works. And these guys, I know you're new. I know it's your first year. But again, you have to make sure that you're getting comfortable and you're making the right plays to stop this dominant Ole Miss offense. Last question to wrap up this LSU defense. Is turnovers the key to winning this game?
For sure. I firmly believe whoever wins the turnover margin on Saturday wins the game.
Yeah, I agree with Andre. Turnovers are such a big aspect of every football game, no matter if you're going up against Alabama or going up against UAB. If you can win that turnover battle, it increases your chance heavily to win that game. So if you can come out on top there, it'll be key.
Now, Ole Miss has recovered 7 fumbles this season. The only one who's ahead of them is LSU, who right now leads the league with turnovers, right? So I like what Brian Kelly said a few weeks ago, that you don't want to rely on turnovers, but it does cause momentum. We saw what it did in that Auburn game, right? Even games that LSU lost, like that Tennessee game with that muff punt in the beginning, it changes the momentum of the game, and that's what LSU has to do this week if they want to come away with the win. Last question, with that being said, LSU, this environment, these fans, right? How much of effect do they have against Ole Miss this week?
Yeah, the LSU fan base is going to be kicking tomorrow. It's not an 11 a.m. game like Tennessee. People will actually be loud. And for Ole Miss, those guys have no experience of anything like Tiger Stadium. They are all young. Pre-COVID, even these guys weren't even here. They've seen nothing like this. So it's going to be a wake-up call for them.
Yeah, earlier in the week, Lane Kiffin was talking about how LSU fans are very knowledgeable about when to get loud at games. And they know their situations and all that. So I think they've been preparing all week for what's probably going to be the loudest environment they've played in so far. So I do think Tiger fans will have an impact on the game and could be a deciding factor in it.
Ole Miss said that this Tiger Stadium is a different animal than any other stadium that they've played in this season. Andre, you make a good point. The COVID, a lot of these guys aren't used to playing in this hostile environment, and this week they're going to go into that 2:30 game. Might be a little cooler than usual. Maybe we won't get a sunburnt, but it's something that this Ole Miss team has to prepare for, because if you know anything, you know how ruthless the SEC fans could be, and especially this LSU fan base. Let's talk about predictions. Andre, who wins this game, LSU or Ole Miss? What's the final score?
Unbiased here, unbiased. I think LSU just such a toss up here, but LSU's going to upset Ole Miss 35-31.
Nick?
See, last time we all picked LSU in a top 10 matchup, they lost. So I'll take one for the team right now. I'll say Ole Miss wins 37-35.
I'm going to agree with you, Nick. It's the Magnolia Bowl. How could you not be excited? Brian Kelly said that during his press conference. The media did not agree with him. But last time, Ole Miss was 7-0. LSU broke their season record of being undefeated. In their 8th game of the season, LSU wins. LSU leads this series 64-41-4. That does not happen again. This is a new culture with Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is making big strides here for Ole Miss. I think it's a close game, but Ole Miss does come away with it 38-35. And with that being said, that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. LSU will take on Ole Miss at 2:30 p.m. in Tiger Stadium on Saturday. I'm Patricia Caputo. Joining me was Andre Champagne and Tiger TV's Nick Lopez. This has been the KLSU Tailgate Show.